Hi, I'm Kim Mooney with an organization called Practically Dying. I want to start with a Sufi story. Two men sitting in an inn, drinking wine and talking about life. One of them started scanning the room and said, "Look, over there, Death. Death is sitting over there, having a glass of wine by himself." The other man caught it and said, "Death, Death, we have to escape." Jumped up, knocking over his chair, ran out of the inn, grabbed a horse and started riding as fast as he could towards Samara, the next town. Death, in the meantime, ambled over to the first table and said to the man, "Was that Anos who was just here?" The man said, "Yes, why?" He said, "Nothing, I'm just curious. I didn't expect to see him here because I have an appointment with him tonight in Samara." You know, we all would like to avoid death at some point, but it's not going to happen. And while this isn't a conversation that's going to make you popular at a cocktail party, it's really one of the most important conversations in our life. And death itself can really help us live the lives that we want so that we end up dying with very few regrets. Now, we know that this is sensitive material. It can be highly emotional, it can be triggering, and we know that death and grief go hand in hand. So if at any time during any of these conversations you find yourself a little uncomfortable, that's okay. Just take a deep breath, take two, and then stop and see if you can figure out what's going on inside of you. Because those responses are important moments to help us discover something about ourselves that's really going to be important down the line. Our goal is to give you a sense of death that maybe you haven't had before and some information. For example, that death really is a part of life. It's not separate, and it really informs how we do live. The fact that dying and death can be incredibly simple and they can be very complex, which is one reason we should know more about it. The fact that although it is serious and although it is dark, there is also humor in death. And also that there are things worse than death. So we are hoping that you become curious about these topics as you're listening to us, and that you get to the point where you want to face the idea of death rather than be riding on that fast horse towards your inevitable appointment in Samara. We're going to have conversations that are fascinating with some really interesting people, and we are glad that you are joining us. And we will talk about whatever you want to talk about also. So thank you. 3, 2, 1. Hi, we're back with our series, Life and Death, Living Fully, Dying Well. Claire Riley is still with me, but we have two new guests here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Lee Abner. I'm a grief therapist. I worked for many years with a woman named Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, the woman who wrote the book called On Death and Dying.
Mm-hmm. And Sue?
I'm Sue Mackey, and I work with hospice, and I also work with an organization called Out of the Box Funeral Planning.
That's such a great name. I love that. Out of the Box Funeral Planning. So we've been talking about death, what it's like for her in her profession, a little bit about what happens with families who are dealing with death. But I think what we want to do is go back and actually ask, what is death? You know, we make an assumption that we hear that word and that everybody feels the same about it, that everybody has the same definition. And what we know is that that's not true at all. So when you think, what is death? Is it about a body dying? Is it all of the deaths that we experience over the course of our lives that actually inform how we're going to deal with our body dying? Is it a spiritual concept? What do you think?
I think it's all of it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any one. I think it's, of course, the death of the body. That's what we think about. But I think for some people, it's terrifying and it's scary. And for other people, maybe some people even look forward to it. I don't know. For some people, they think a lot about what will come after, and others are terrified to think about what might come after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And all the losses that lead up to it. It's a lot. It's so much. It's almost overwhelming, I think, for our culture in a lot of ways, for people to talk about it and think about it.
Yeah. It combines in all of the losses that you anticipate as you age, previous to your death, if you're lucky enough to live to an older age. And it seems to me that the actual dying of the body, the physical dying of the body, is the least problematic for people. It's the potential for suffering up to that point. It's the losses that you go through as you approach dying, whether you're ill or not. You start to lose body capacities and maybe cognitive abilities and that sort of thing. And those are all little losses that happen along the way. And then the afterlife piece is a whole another piece, because some people, like you said, we're saying, some people are terrified and some people find comfort, and some people go, what the heck, you know, I'll be dead, so I won't know, and it won't matter. So, yeah, but it's very individual, and so much comes from the way you've been raised and acculturated, and makes the conversation difficult.
I think that's one of the biggest things that we've noticed is that this one big word, death, and that becomes the impenetrable wall. And if people can go beyond that and start to discover more about the nature of it, that's why conversation is so important, because those stories are the things that people, that's an aha moment. But one of the things we're going to talk about a little bit later is that when we talk about fear of death, I think sometimes people aren't really afraid, they're just so ignorant they don't know what to ask.
I agree, Kim. I mean, when you were, I'd like to pick up on when you were talking about the suffering part of the dying. People do have a picture, many people have a picture that that's a horrible experience. And again, it's lack of information that there can be a very comforting time. I mean, there are clearly lots of things that's the good side of medicine, is to help people be comfortable while they do their normal process. And again, if we can help people understand that and give them a picture of what it will look like, you know, and again, my experience, clinical experience, is in the ICU when they take the tube, the breathing tube out, what that is likely to look like. And even if the patient isn't fully conscious, to be able to explain to the patient, step by step, this is what's happening. You're giving people knowledge about what it's likely to look like. You can't predict exactly, but it helps them go through that fear of what death really is.
Normalizes everything so that you
Normalizes
don't
it.
feel like, oh, this is a terrible, abnormal thing to have happen. It's like, this is what happens.
I think that's why the hospice movement has been so critical and so important in our country, because it helps people who haven't been through it before and maybe haven't even thought about it understand what's happening, so it's not so scary.
Yes.
It becomes easier,
Yes.
and they're not alone.
Yes.
I think one of you mentioned that some people are less worried about dying. I think I'm more worried about dying than death. Like maybe being alone. You know, what if there's nobody around, or pain? I think a lot of people worry about that, and I think I've thought about that too. Although the hospice movement has helped a lot around the whole concept of pain and comfort. That's been really wonderful.
Yes. And I think that the things that hospice has been able to do in our country have bled over into the hospital system as well. So we do a better job in hospitals with pain control and suffering than we used to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
This is a really important concept, that what we're doing when we're imparting information is not guaranteeing people that it's going to be easy or even comfortable, but I think the thing I've heard the most is that it's the surprise that is the most horrific, that people being surprised, that families being surprised. So the information is empowering to help people do what they can, but even when it can't be changed, you know, in the medical situation, maybe somebody is in pain, or when you can't stop the progression of something, knowing what's coming is really important, separate from how the death is going to turn out.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yes. And it's not easy. You know, it does have but given the right support and information, when you heal through the grieving process and you look back at the moments, they can be precious. They can be life-changing. Yeah.
And you can start to build the basis for that now. That's, I think, what anybody who works around end of life knows, is you start now, the conversations, the understanding of what's going on. And this applies, that's why I think it's so important to think about it now, because we're talking a little bit about deaths in the hospital or deaths that are expected. But when someone dies very suddenly, that also really impacts how their family lives. It impacts what they've left as a legacy before this really makes a difference, especially if they don't have a chance to say goodbye or get prepared.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And shouldn't that be a lesson for all of us to live better today? I mean, we know that, we
Right,
know it
we
up
do.
here, but do we know it here in our guts? Do we really commit to living today as if it were my last hour? What would I do? I'd be right here, girls.
So that really speaks to one of the things we wanted to address is why should we talk about it now rather than, as I said, waiting for it to find us at the last minute? What about our attitudes and the things we carry into this either help us or hinder us when it comes our time or our family's time, or even before time? I mean, I know you and a number of people have had gatherings over every Thanksgiving and just talked about it. Nothing is imminent, but it changes the family culture. It makes things more available. So to me, one of the most important reasons to get ready for it is because if things are more familiar to you, then when you drop into a traumatized situation or something that you're not familiar with at all, you at least have your land legs a little bit. You're not starting from scratch.
Yeah.
Well, and it's a gift to your family to have these conversations, because then they have guidance and they're not left to second guess, when you're in the middle of a surgery that's gone bad and the surgeon comes out and says, well, what should we, should we continue, should we not? If you've been clear with your family or they've asked you, what would make life not worth living anymore for you, or what makes life worth living, and they're very clear about your value system, it makes it, the family can go, oh, that's what Dad would have wanted. We can let him go, because if he's going to come out of this operation as a quadriplegic, he won't be able to do his crossword puzzles and blah 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 that he said that he was important to him, and it makes it much more clear. It's not always clear cut because we don't ever know what the actual trajectory is going to be, but it's powerful stuff if the family has had the conversations and doesn't have to guess or have contention among family members about, well, I don't know, I think Mom would like this, I know we have to hang on, or you've got more experience with this, Claire. I mean, you've been with families at the end. I'm sure you've seen all kinds of
All kinds of things.
situations
Yes.
that come
Yeah.
up based on whether they've talked or they've not talked.
Yes. Yes, and I guess I'll briefly talk about my personal experience with my parents. They both were hospice patients. They both died at home. And 10 years before they died, they gathered us all together, the 10 of us. Remember, there were 10 of us, and we had 8 days of just the siblings and the parents together at the home, the home we grew up in. And every day somebody did an entertainment piece and was in charge of the food. So this sister who's a nurse that I mentioned before and I had Thursday afternoon to do our entertainment.
Oh.
And so we pulled out the advanced directives. And
What you call it.
I know, imagine the surprise, we're talking about property managers and, restaurant owners and people that don't think about these things at all, and they're young. And we, because there were so many of us, we could break into small groups.
Oh.
And so you found yourself a partner and you talked about it. And then coming back together, it was Mom and Dad's turn to tell us. So when the moment of death was approaching, and one of the brothers might wanted us to take him back to the hospital, and he was very clear he didn't want to do that. You could say, that's not what Dad wanted to do. So it wasn't easy, and we weren't all on the same page exactly, but in retrospect, and that's the afterlife for the family who survives, is you look back and you say, oh, we did exactly what Dad wanted us to do.
I have the opposite. I have the reverse story.
Yeah.
Because when I first started doing this work, I thought that this was, everyone should do their advanced directives. Everyone should talk about it. So I went back to Thanksgiving, but I didn't tell anybody I was coming with this material. So we all sat down at the table, and I said, hey, everybody, let's talk about what happens when we're dying. And my father and mother looked at me very proud. My sister went to the bathroom and never came back. My brother had 2 glasses of wine in less than a minute. It took me 10 years to get him to finish his advanced directives. But we did every year after that. I learned to be more subtle. We would come in and I would put down a candle. I'd light a candle and say, this is for Grandma and everybody else who isn't here. So